Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm Beth Bailey here with my co-host Michael Cook. Today we're bringing you another installment of our series focusing on the 2-year anniversary of our withdrawal from Afghanistan. And we're talking with Joe Laude, who was a Marine Corps Sgt in the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment when he was sent to Hamid Karzai International Airport to support the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021. Joe now volunteers with Operation Allies Refuge Foundation, which advocates for veterans who endured trauma or moral injury during the course of their service. Joe, we're so grateful to you for sitting down with us to talk about what you did and what you saw during the Afghanistan departure. So thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Excited to be here.
Well, to start with, when did you learn that you would be going to Afghanistan, and what were your feelings about that at the time?
So I think it was about we knew about Afghanistan months before going to Kabul. It was about, Marines are very used to the whole patience game, or the standby. And I think that's kind of across all the branches there. So we didn't know that it was actually going to happen until August 13th, when it was our commanders were coming up to us and saying, "Hey, you're going, and pack up all your stuff." So it was going through all the gear lists and all that. I was part of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. 4th Platoon had left already, and it was about either August 15th or the night of August 15th or the 16th that they had left. And, the reports that were coming in, the intel reports, they were very serious. We had no idea what was happening with, the collaboration with the Taliban at the time. So when we went in, when we were, prepping to go, we thought we were going to get, leaving to essentially become or going into a suicide mission, having no idea that these talks were happening. And we're thinking that we were just going to be confronted by suicide, IEDs, VBIDs, all of that as we landed. Because of, the intel reports that were coming in, we were receiving a lot of reports on firefights happening with 10th Mountain Division, 1st Marines, 8th, or 1st Battalion, 8th Marines that were there before us. We heard about a Marine that had got shot. I can't confirm or deny that actually happening. But just all the stories of these guys just running around across the airport, and it made it surreal. It made it feel like, hey, we're going to get into it. A lot of Marines were very excited about it. And then there were a lot of Marines that were very anxious about it. And so those nights leading up to it, they were preparing, or at least sitting home, or making peace with their family members, or they're making peace with their God. So it was definitely a very surreal moment, and people were really taking it in and trying to realize, hey, this might be it. That was the type of feeling that it was. It was also my sergeant, platoon sergeant, he even said, hey, be prepared to see your friends die. But, at the same time, this was it. This was, we were raised by GWAT veterans. Afghanistan was the big golden ticket for all of us. And so, for a lot of us, we definitely wanted to go there and get some. It was definitely one of those things.
When you got there, was it what you expected, or did you see some things? What was it like when you ended up on the ground?
Yeah, so thanks to the 10th Mountain and 1-8 and our the platoon of that one platoon from our company, they cleared the airfield with the help of a Afghan unit that was attached to CIA, who used this element used different methods that we wouldn't have used to clear that airfield, including killing people, shooting people who were just literally pleading for their life, running people over in order to send a message, hey, we're not playing around. if you guys are staying on this airfield, we will kill you. And, as soon as they got that message, like it definitely, it was almost like a necessary evil to clear that airfield for sure. But it was just, for the guys on the ground that had to witness that, it was definitely different and traumatizing. I can realize that from their perspectives.
And was that the first time that you really saw the desperation of the crowds? Or what was that moment where you realized that it was overwhelming?
Yeah, for me, I didn't get to see my first Afghans when I first landed there. But for them, absolutely, that was when they actually saw it. These guys climbing on C-17s,
yeah,
and falling from the sky. That was a realization. Hey, these people are beyond desperate. Like that is, the word desperation doesn't mean the same to me anymore after that. It's something way more than what we say it is here in the States.
And I think it's important to kind of take a sidebar here. Like the reason that all of this, of what other people were feeling, is because of Operation Allies Refuge Foundation, correct? And that you've been able to liaise with all these other people who were there and talk about their experiences of that day.
Absolutely.
Is that a healing experience to you, or is it hard to carry kind of all of that knowledge and all of those feelings around?
Yeah, it's definitely the difficult thing about OAR Foundation is it's a trip back into the darkness again, and for me, like my experience, I felt like I was mentally resilient as a Marine, but I think part of the moral injury aspect is it's an emotional toll that takes kind of a toll after time, and it builds up. And certain things that you could or couldn't do during that time, it weighs heavily on you. And then when you have these conversations with guys who had immense stories to tell, and they felt like they were forgotten, you share that burden with them when you are working in the foundation,
mm-hmm.
and it 100% weighs heavily on you.
Yeah. Is there any specific moments from HKIA that you get taken back to in your head when you think about people getting forgotten?
I think for me, understanding what happened with the 10th Mountain Division and the obstacles that they had to undertake, and then they came home and unable to talk about their situation, and then myself being the first person that they were able to talk to for many of them, it was definitely something that took me back to just the simple personal feelings of isolation and being forgotten. There are other incidences that when you think about like maybe flashbacks or anything like that, I think it's different. It's the way that I see it. It's not the same as maybe PTS or PTSD, where some incident will trigger something within inside of you. There is something that kind of weighs on you as a spiritual measure than it is an instinctual one.
It's got to be difficult to then come back and think about those things again. So going back then and asking you to go back to that day that is difficult, or those days that are difficult to think about, what was the day-to-day like at HKIA, and what kinds of things were you seeing that were difficult to maybe understand as an American or as a Marine?
The biggest thing to understand as an American or someone who belongs to maybe the Western civilization is understanding that men take precedence in their culture over women, and trying to understand like that these men were taking the spots of women and children was hard to bear for me. It almost became something that we held a lot of hostility towards these men, these single-age men that were doing whatever it took to get through people. It was definitely difficult to understand that aspect of that situation. Because, for most of us, or at least for the guys that I was with, we were doing everything we could to help the women and children. That was what was our priority. I know that's the same for the guys that I've talked to throughout all the other branches. The men and the women and children were definitely the priority, and the single-age men were definitely the problem.
Mm-hmm. And what examples did you see of that?
So there was at the gates for sure, we saw it, where the men would, simply trample over women or children or use children as a way to say, because they knew that we were way more empathetic towards children than anything else. So they would often sometimes grab a child and try to use it to benefit them to get through the gate, which was, it was difficult to understand that. And, that whole experience was just surreal to me and to everybody else, that this was the way that it was over there.
What would end up happening to those? I mean, do you have any idea of what happened to women and children who might have been left behind so that men could come through?
Well, I have no idea what happened to the women and children. I do have some concern over some of the men that we brought in. Bringing them into a society where they might feel disenfranchised, and where they might, they just don't fit or feel like they belong in a society that is totally different than the one that they're used to. There is some potential for something dangerous to happen, and we need to be careful and keep our eyes open. And part of what I've been trying to do is I've been volunteering in the Afghan community where I'm at, just to see if I can gain some insight into that and provide whatever coaching or mentorship that I can to help bridge the gap. But that's an American problem that I think that all of us need to start integrating with and seeing if we can help, because that's, obviously to me is someone who's disenfranchised. That can be a serious problem, and we need to fix that.
Sure. And in my head, I can reason it in some ways where, perhaps the male of the family was the one who was under the most direct threat or had the most ability to go work outside of the country. But then women and children left in Afghanistan. I see it all the time. I see this scenario, and, that women can't work. Children can't go to school after the age of 6th grade if they're females. So we've really created this horrible situation with that. And I had no idea that what you described happens so often. So it's definitely an eye opener for me. What other kinds of things did you see that, from a media aspect, we just saw great big crowds of people and a lot of desperation, but you saw it firsthand. So what other kinds of things were you seeing on the ground that we probably didn't get to see, from the news?
Yeah. So in different things, there's definitely a multitude of stories I can tell on that aspect of what the media missed out on. I think the biggest one was seeing the loss of life when it comes to children throughout that entire endeavor, because they were quickly exposed to dysentery from Abbey Gate, or they were exposed to the lack of resources when it comes to, baby formula or, access to the medical help. A lot of these people were getting crushed in the crowds, being stampeded and killed there. And people don't talk too much about that. And then also the exits. Obviously, I think a lot of people who've been following what's been happening understand what happens at the exits, but the media, I feel like they continue to not understand what was happening at those exits. And it was, to me, and many of the people who had to witness that was, just executions left and right, or serious beatings that were happening at those exits.
So let's go into that. I mean, you saw this happen. You saw the Taliban was executing people. I want to start there, and then we'll go back to the crush of the crowd. Mm-hmm. What were they doing? Were they just waiting for anyone to get released?
So I didn't get to witness and this is the interesting thing about the positioning at Abbey Gate, and the difference between where people were. The guys on the wall, they didn't get to witness the executions, but the guys in the towers, the sniper teams, they were watching this through lenses and scopes, with the finger on the trigger, like just wishing that they could help these people. And that was, to me, an extreme moral dilemma that they were faced with the entire time that they were there. Is that, they had absolutely the power to stop it, but they didn't have the ROEs to stop these people from committing these crimes. And it's tough, and it weighs heavily on anyone who has that warrior spirit where, hey, I'm more than willing to give up my life to save someone. And it's definitely tough when, someone who's designed or was trained up to pull the trigger, and they couldn't do it when it was most needed.
Sure. Do you have any idea of the number of people? I mean, was it they were looking for specific people, the Taliban? Do you have any idea about whom they were going after?
So I don't quite know or understand if who they were looking for exactly. I just know that they had that checkpoint that basically allowed people in, and they had that checkpoint at the exit. And from what I understand, the guys who were pushed towards the exit, they didn't get any sympathy because they got their chance already. And I'm sure that the people that we pushed, because these Marines or the State Department didn't clarify exactly what we needed to look for, we pushed many people out that should be in America today. And that continues to infuriate me to this day.
Sure. What was it like to have to tell someone? I mean, what were the interactions like as you were having to push people out?
Throughout my experience at HKIA, I was definitely trying to stay as stoic and away from my personal emotions as possible. When I was pushing people out, like that was it. Like I was doing my job. The way that I see it now, and I think part of the moral injury aspect of this entire thing is we have to answer for our consequences of whether or not we did the right thing. And that's something that I think about all the time, because I still remember the faces, and that definitely keeps me up at night.
What about the opposite? Did you ever get to bring someone in through the gates?
Absolutely. There was a moment, and I was basically playing the bad guy up until that moment. And I was at Abbey Gate on the wall checking for paperwork and documents, and you had a bunch of these Afghans and their accents, and they're pleading for help and talking to me, and I hear this man, and in the most distinct and clear American accent, he says, "Sir, I'm an American. Can you get me out of here? And I turned towards him, and this is in the middle of the dark, and you can hardly see anything, but I heard his accent. So I turned towards him, and I pointed at him, and I'm like, I'm getting you the fuck out of here. And I told him to get his family, and his entire family was coming over. It was like almost up to 20 people in his family, and bringing him over, and holding a child in your hand is just, being up to that point and understanding what life is and what being a human is. It was different, and it hits you totally different when you have that experience. I brought them all over. It was like 20 of them. Brought them over to across the canal, and we brought them to the checkpoint, or not to the checkpoint. We were bringing them up to where the State Department was processing them, and a Marine officer told me, "Hey, you can't. Only immediate family only. Only immediate family only." And so that up to 20 some people is now only up to 4. And I brought the rest of them to the State Department's line where they were processing people. But in the back of my mind, I was like, no, I can't do that. I can't let them go to the exit. So I chased them down. I tried to chase them down, and I couldn't find them. I was looking for them everywhere. And I was about to give up, but I saw a face that I recognized. And I reached out and grabbed him, and I said, get everyone in your family right now. I'm going to sneak you in. I just wanted to give them a chance. That's it. And so I brought the rest of these people. It was like maybe 15 people, 18 people. And I snuck them back in, and the Marine officer said, hey, the State Department is not going to, accept these people. And I said, fuck the State Department. And I brought them in. And I gave him that chance, at least gave him that chance. And, at least for that moment, it made me feel like a human in all of that. So it was definitely a very big moment for myself.
Have you gotten the opportunity to meet any of the people you brought in, or any of the people that maybe some of your buddies brought in back here in the States?
So I personally haven't met anyone that was able to get back to the States. I would love to meet that American that I was able to get out, but I do tutor kids, Afghan kids. So I try trying to integrate into the community somehow to kind of keep oversight and see how it's going. And because their success or their failure is a massive deal to all of us. It's part of the healing process. If they don't succeed in America, then we feel like we failed.
Yeah.
So I feel like contributing back is definitely helpful to the healing process. And it's also helpful when we understand exactly like where they're standing at. And, what the insight that I have right now with the refugee population in America, it's not good. What they're dealing with is not good right now. A lot of these kids are deciding to turn into gangs. I've heard about that. I've heard, these kids, some of the high schoolers are still learning at, first grade level, and there's a lot of catching up to do, and there's a lot of work to do as Americans, because, who are we as Americans if we don't, help these people out?
Yeah, it's there's not as much said about the refugee population. And I think too, I've tried to talk with Afghans who've come here about, what are the struggles you're facing? And they're just so grateful to be here that they don't want to raise alarms about issues, I've found. And I think that it's really important that we do talk about those shortcomings, because you're right. It's their success, but it's also, making sure that, we're doing our part as a nation, and that the rest of the community that might not understand what they went through because they didn't pay attention for 20 years of war, or or that they have, maybe some preconceived notions about Afghans, that they see, these are people who are striving, who've been through so much, because they went through those crowds too, on the opposite side, where I'm watched people get crushed and, watched their friends get turned away, or all of these horrible things. They saw that too. And they've got to then deal with that and be refugees in this country where I just wrote a story about one family that they can't get any benefits. They didn't come through on the NEO. They came through the Mexican border and asked for asylum and are not being able to get it yet. And they can't get benefits. They can't work. They can't do anything. I mean, that's a very difficult situation to be in. And think about, there's a lot there to unpack. I'm grateful that you're doing that work and seeing those difficult things. Let's go back to, you talked about the people being crushed in those crowds. Could you see that from your vantage point?
So what I was able to witness, I didn't get to see the crushing crowd. So there was an initial push into Abbey Gate before I was able to get there. And throughout that push, there was, deployment of CS gas that led to a stampede. And for those who are listening, CS gas is essentially like the riot control tear gas, which is non-lethal, but it is devastating, and it definitely does hurt to inhale. But these people, after that deployment, there were definitely a lot of people who were crushing each other and ended up killing. I can't say the exact number, but there was definitely a few that were definitely crushed to death in that stampede. But for some of the things that I was able to see or witness was, I saw the individuals in the canal getting really just destroyed by the sea wire, that you couldn't even see the sea wire because it was so hidden underneath the water, and they would be stepping in it and getting cut up. And you got to think the water was sewage. It was all the the shit coming out of the city, and people were, and children were. I know that there were children or reports of children dying from that illness there, from getting cut up there. So it was definitely difficult to see the situation there, and it was almost surreal to know that people were willing to go through that city and then go through that canal, and then attempt to try to get into that processing line that the State Department had. It was just, I don't know if I could have done that. That was,
and that's like, that's how we were sending
people,
groups like, Pineapple Express, go through the canal because it was the only way to access, or get attention at the gate. And it's horrid. It always reminds me of how the Taliban would often lace their IEDs with fecal matter, because they knew that then, you would have the transfer of germs into wounded flesh and create even more damage. And that's what I think about when I hear about the sea wire and the sewage canal. It's just horrid. There is never, it feels like, an end to the gore and disgustingness of our Afghan war. What was it like to mentally process? Did you mentally process any of this at the time, or was this kind of like an afterwards, were you just going on during these days?
Yeah, I was able to kind of reflect on it at the same time. To me, it was obvious, like, this was just the entire collapse of the GWAT in front of our eyes. It was a fall of a nation, and to me, it felt like it was the beginning of the fall of America. Like, this was a very significant event that kind of really just reflected the weakness that we've just become accustomed to, and it just was not the way that it should have went down. And I will say on behalf of most of the guys that I was with that they were all feeling this same type of way as well. It wasn't a good experience when it comes to the way that we thought about our country back at home while we were there, and it was also just definitely tough for a lot of the younger guys to process what was happening when it came to seeing everything unfold like that.
Do you remember the first time that you saw someone from the Taliban, where that was and how that felt to you?
Yeah, so I was on Abbey Gate, and I just remember standing on the wall, and right there, like right in front of my face, I just saw a group of looked like Taliban, like more like Taliban elders show up, like essentially maybe commanders show up, and they stand right in front of me, across from the wall, and it was surreal. It was almost like I should be like my brother was fighting these guys a few years back. It just didn't seem right. It didn't sit well in my gut. It was one of those moments where it felt more like I should have been flicking the weapon off safe more than just allowing them to just to stand there. So it was definitely awkward moment.
I've heard some people who were at HKIA talk about kind of the Taliban taunting them in some ways. Did you feel like they were trying to do that at all, or were they just kind of show of force? What was their attitude?
I had a good buddy that I was with in my machine guns section, and they went after post blast to go grab equipment and do a kind of an analysis of what happened on that on the X. And he went with his staff sergeant to go speak with some of the Taliban leadership. And he had a moment in that time where one of the Taliban guys was standing there right in front of him, and the Taliban guy was, taunting him by flicking his weapon off safe, like on and off safe, and basically making a big joke out of it. And he was doing the same thing. He looked at him straight in the head, like doing the same thing back at him. But, it was after those moments where it's like, you can't just, exact revenge on these people. And it just felt like these people were behind it. Just definitely felt like they were behind it. And you couldn't do anything about it.
I can't imagine that feeling. I don't think I'd ever heard anyone talk about that until the House hearing. Was it Tyler Vargas Smith talked about being up in the sniper nest and not being able to pull the trigger on somebody who he felt was probably the person who had the bomb at Abbey Gate, and just nobody ever got to hear those stories. What other things happened that were difficult to process that we just didn't get to see that are still tough?
I would definitely say that it was definitely a clash of cultures throughout that entire thing, which is definitely difficult. And then seeing an individual leave his family and having a discussion with this person about, he asked me about what to do about his leaving his daughter at the gate. And I told him to go fucking back. And I told him, like, you need to go back to your daughter and your children right now. And then an hour or so later, seeing him walk up to walk up into a plane without them. It was definitely that was like the thing that was the most difficult, is understanding the cultures, and not everybody's like that. There's definitely individuals out there that did anything for their family, and but seeing some individuals, or a lot of individuals, do things that just didn't make sense to us, and that might be just human desperation and that we don't know about. Um, but sometimes I see it in a different light, because we see what happened in Ukraine, where the men stayed back and fought, and so that was also a very disappointing moment, when we realized like that they did stand a fighting chance. They really did, and they decided not to fight. They gave up. They gave up all the fobs. They gave up all the posts. They gave it up, and that was difficult for us to understand as Marines, as soldiers and airmen and sailors that were all there. It was definitely very difficult to understand that.
It's just an endless stream of difficult things. And I know we're going to talk about Abbey and the bombing at Abbey Gate for another episode, so I don't want to get into that here. But how long were you? Also, I'd like to correct the record. It's not Tyler Vargas Smith. It's Tyler Vargas Andrews. Sorry, Tyler, if you're listening. You were, after Abbey, how many days were you guys still in country after the bombing? I mean,
So we were there for on the 27th and the 28th, so 2 days after. Within those days, we conducted a retrograde, and like Captain Barnheisel, who was on the podcast before, he stated correctly. Like we exacted our revenge because we couldn't go out on patrol and get into a firefight. We exacted revenge on all the things that were around us. So we destroyed everything. That happened on the 28th, where we destroyed all the vehicles, destroyed literally everything, all the infrastructure on that airport. The day before that was when we had where we walked our fallen to the planes, and that was a very surreal moment as well. Like, I say surreal all the time, but it was like it's hard to comprehend, like that these events actually happened. And we walked them through, and it seemed like the entire, like all the units that were there lined up the streets to pay tribute. And we marched through the streets, and we carried our dead to the planes, and it was just something different, and I don't know, it was one of those moments for sure.
I've never heard anyone talk about that moment before. So can you kind of paint the picture for us and talk about, you said you're going through the streets and it was everybody escorting all these bodies.
Yeah, so we had about, it looked like the entire NATO forces that were there, the British, the Spanish, the Italians. They lined the streets, and then 2-1 walks literally down all the streets, while these people are literally lined up alongside of it, as we escorted our fallen to the planes. And it was very, I don't know, it makes you feel like, one thing, like, yes, it's nice to have everybody paying tribute, but it's also very, very sad that this event had happened, and we could have done something about it. Hindsight bias. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting moment for sure.
Do you think?
What were the I think we all say that it didn't have to happen, and I think that's very accurate. Was there any, like, a couple of things that you could pinpoint that, you wish we would have done differently?
Yeah, I think before we even stepped off, we knew that Kabul was a bad option.
Yeah.
We knew that Bagram would have been optimal.
Yeah.
I think we almost went in without a plan. And we had to come up with everything on the fly. And I have to give great credit to, our commanders, especially like for my commander, Captain Barnheisel, for really stepping up and really providing for us the best solutions that he could come up with. And it really did come down to those leaders at those levels. The company commanders, the platoon commanders, and the NCOs and sergeants that were involved there. It really came down to every unit leader coming together and putting this all together. It wasn't really the role of the higher ups, like beyond that. It was really like everything was happening on the fly. And so we have to really give credit to all the company commanders that were there putting this all together. And then some of the battalion operations officers who were really working in like endless hours, like making sure that everything was being put into place, especially like the guys that came off the 24th MEU or 1st Battalion, 8th Marines who were really working in those hours to make sure everything was working together. I have to give credit to those guys. Everything was on the fly. Everything was changing left and right, and they made sure that things were getting processed and people were working where they weren't just literally working for way too long where they couldn't get a break. They did a good job for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, the acts by the Marines and soldiers and all our armed forces on the ground was, really nothing short of heroic. And I know me and Beth are just proud as hell of everybody that was there.
It's the constant theme of all of these episodes is how much of a difference people who are not the leaders of our country made. I mean, the leaders were kind of absent, and it was the American people who were not in leadership who really pulled through and turned this into not a total clusterfuck. When you came back, you mentioned that 10th Mountain couldn't talk about what went on. Were you able to discuss what you had seen, or were you discouraged from doing that?
I can't say whether or not we were discouraged from it. We did see what was happening at 1-8. There were some videos that came out, and they tried to destroy this guy. You guys know him. And to me, it was very. I think that takes away from what part of the after action that needs to happen is these guys need to start releasing it instead of holding it in. And the more that you hold it in, it's just going to take its course on you. So as soon as you come home, you start pouring it out and then letting people know and building that support system around you instead of hiding it and going further into isolation. 10th Mountain, they had a difficult time with this. They came home and they went straight back, went right back into training. And it doesn't help being in Fort Drum. If you've ever been up in that area, it's not the nicest area to kind of relax. But for some reason, a lot of these guys just didn't feel comfortable or weren't able to share their story, and that, to me, that was something that needed to change, and we needed to kind of target that population especially. They had suffered when they came home, and they had lost someone. So it was definitely very difficult when they came home and they had to kind of be sat down. There's an individual from 10th Mountain. His name's First Sergeant Andrew Kelly, and he really helped mold these guys. And to me, I think he's the guy that kept these guys together for sure, and kept these guys with their heads together for sure. And there's still a lot of work to do within those communities, but he definitely paved the path for sure for these guys.
That's really good to hear, because leaders really can make a difference, and they can be found everywhere. Speaking of which, when did you start working with OAR? When did OAR get created?
Yeah, so I actually created OAR. I founded it as soon as the first anniversary happened. I was doing making my rounds with all the phone calls to all my guys, and I was checking in on them, and I was like, man, we're not doing too good mentally, and I just felt like, hey, we needed to do something. We needed to bring all these guys back together, and it doesn't just include 2-1. It includes all of us that participated in this event. So that's when we started the Instagram. I got the Instagram up and running, and we just the number of people just flooding into it was awesome to see that, and getting the stories as soon as possible out. Literally taking starting, I think it was August 8th when we started it, and just getting a bunch of stories throughout August up on the page, and making people feel like, hey, people actually care about us. That was immensely powerful for all of us.
Where's the best place for people to find you?
We're definitely most heavily active on Instagram. Our website, you can definitely hit us up at Operation Allies Refuge Foundation.org and find her or contact us that way. But the Instagram is definitely the most powerful place where we're the most active at. But yeah, definitely we're definitely open. I try to answer everybody's DMs and make sure that everybody's heard. So I make that a priority.
I think it's the most important thing that can be done right now. Give those stories a place. Give people a place where they can feel safe just talking about what happened, because so few people want to talk about it and want to talk about the aftermath, the refugees who've been brought here, the people we left behind. I had never said it before, but you said it today, kind of felt like the start of a fall of a nation. I think that Tom Schumann referred to it as end state nation behavior or something like that. It was something, where this is not the behavior of a country that's faring well. And we want to pretend like that's not the case. And I think it's really important to talk about these things. And because history cannot look on this as a success. And that's all I see the State Department trying to do, is manufacture a success out of something that they failed utterly to handle. It's really difficult to hear all the things, all the hard things that you guys had to see, but I'm just really grateful that you've created a place where they can be heard and be seen. So thanks for doing that and for being here today. Is there anything that you'd want to leave listeners with, about OAR or about HKIA that we didn't touch on?
Absolutely. For all the OAR vets out there, you hold stake in this foundation. This is your foundation. This was made for you, and this is by you. This is everything that we're trying to do to kind of elevate the community. We're not victims to this event. We're using this event to become more powerful than than all the things that are trying to take us down, even the government. So we're definitely going to use this foundation to make us a better community and to keep us intact, for sure.
I love it. Well, closing, most of our listeners know that we like to end our episodes with a story from someone from Afghanistan, just about maybe the ordeals that they've undergone during 20 years of war, nearly, or more than that, really, if we look at Afghanistan's history, or the return to Taliban rule, or being at HKIA, anything. But again, we are out of stories to share. So this is yet another plug that Michael and I want to hear from Afghans about their experience in any form that they want to share their story. We'd like to share it here. It's one thing for us to talk about how terrible the situation is, but I think it's quite another for the world to hear the voices of Afghans talking about what they've been through and what they've seen. So please send us letters, poetry, art about your situation to our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Joe, thanks so much for taking us back to HKIA and all those difficult moments. It really was powerful.
Of course, this is cathartic, for sure.
Well, to all our listeners, thanks again for sharing time with us and supporting the people of Afghanistan and all of the men and women who went to help with our departure there. And Tasha Kaur, we hope to see you again soon.